What if the stories we grew up with, the epic tales of gods and monsters, lost cities and world-ending floods, were more than just entertainment? What if they were actually urgent messages in a bottle, carefully sealed by ancient civilizations and sent across thousands of years directly to us? Imagine a world where myths weren't just imaginative explanations for how the sun moves across the sky or why the seasons change, but sophisticated, coded warnings from societies that saw their own collapse coming. These narratives, passed down through generations, might have been their way of shouting across the centuries, trying to tell us something vital about the fragile nature of human achievement. They saw the cracks forming in their own foundations, recognized the patterns of decay, and embedded those insights into the very stories meant to define their culture. Today, we're setting out on a remarkable journey to uncover 20 of these profound myths stories that eerily predicted the downfall of the very civilizations that created them. We'll travel from the sunken spires of Atlantis to the frozen battlefields of Ragnarök, from the dense jungles of the Maya to the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia. Each myth we explore will reveal a unique perspective on collapse, a different set of warnings about hubris, environmental neglect, moral decay, or spiritual disconnect. These aren't just ancient curiosities, they're mirrors held up to our own modern world, reflecting patterns and pressures that feel strangely familiar. Our ancestors witnessed empires rise and fall, and they distilled those lessons into narratives that have survived millennia for a reason. By the time we reach the end of this exploration, you will never look at mythology the same way again. These stories transform from simple tales of adventure and magic into something far more profound, a collective memory of human vulnerability, a guidebook of pitfalls to avoid, and a testament to the enduring hope that future generations might learn from the mistakes of the past. So join me as we decode these ancient prophecies, unravel their hidden meanings, and discover what 20 lost civilizations desperately wanted us to understand about resilience, humility, and the delicate balance that keeps any society from crumbling. Let's begin with our first civilization's haunting foresight. Plato's account of Atlantis stands as one of the most enduring and enigmatic myths of a civilization foretelling its own doom. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 B.C.E., he doesn't present it as a fable but as a true historical account passed down from wise men like his ancestor Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests. These priests described Atlantis as a formidable naval power that lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, an island larger than ancient Libya and Asia Minor combined. It was a paradise of concentric rings of water and land, with a magnificent capital city built from exotic stones of red, white, and black. The Atlanteans were masters of engineering and agriculture, harnessing the land's resources with advanced technology that seemed almost magical for its time. They constructed grand temples, palaces, harbors, and even a complex system of canals that connected the rings. This wasn't just a successful society, it was a utopian project, a pinnacle of human achievement blessed by the gods themselves. Poseidon, the god of the sea, was its divine patron, and his half-human descendants ruled with wisdom and justice for generations. The land was so rich and fertile it could support 2 harvests a year, and the people lived in a golden age of prosperity and harmony. But this is where the warning truly begins. Over centuries, the divine nature in the rulers began to dilute. As Plato writes, the human element in them started to overwhelm the divine. Their virtue eroded, replaced by an insatiable hunger for more. The very wealth and power that made them great became their poison. they grew arrogant, believing their might made them invincible. They ceased to value wisdom and justice, instead pursuing material wealth, military expansion, and absolute dominion. They became a nation of conquerors, launching a campaign to subjugate the entire Mediterranean world, seeing themselves as masters of all they surveyed. This moral decay, this hubris, did not go unnoticed by the gods. In a single day and night of catastrophic violence, as Plato chillingly records, the entire island was consumed by violent earthquakes and floods, vanishing beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. The gods did not merely destroy them, they erased them, leaving only a shallow, muddy shoal where a great empire once stood, a permanent warning to all who would follow in their footsteps. The story is a masterful allegory. For Plato, a philosopher deeply concerned with the ideal state and the nature of justice, Atlantis was the ultimate cautionary tale. It illustrates that no amount of technological advancement or military power can save a society that has lost its moral and ethical foundation. The infrastructure, the canals, the palaces, all the tangible achievements were meaningless once the intangible soul of the civilization had rotted away. Their pursuit of power alienated them not just from the gods, but from the very principles that allowed them to flourish in the first place. Modern interpretations have only deepened this warning. Some scholars suggest the myth could be a distorted memory of a real historical catastrophe, perhaps the volcanic eruption that devastated the Minoan civilization on Thera around 1600 BCE, an event so colossal it would have echoed through oral traditions for a millennium. Others see it as a pure philosophical construct, a fictional device to illustrate a point about the Athenian Empire's own ambitions and potential for collapse. But its true power lies in its timeless relevance. Today, we see echoes of Atlantis everywhere, in societies that prioritize endless economic growth over environmental sustainability, in cultures obsessed with technological spectacle while neglecting social equity, in nations that believe their military or economic dominance makes them invulnerable to the consequences of their actions. The sinking of Atlantis is a metaphor for any civilization overextending its reach, exploiting its resources to depletion, and believing itself to be above the natural and moral laws that ultimately govern all human endeavor. It is the definitive myth of hubris, a theme that will reverberate through every story we examine from here. From the sunken halls of Atlantis, we journey now to the frozen north, to a mythology not of a single fallen city, but of an entire cosmos facing its inexorable end. The Norse vision of Ragnarök is perhaps the most starkly beautiful and brutally honest apocalyptic prophecy ever conceived. It is not a simple tale of punishment for hubris, but a complex and inevitable tapestry of fate, where the gods themselves are not omnipotent rulers but doomed participants in a cycle they helped create. The primary sources for this world-ending drama are the Poetic Edda, a collection of ancient Old Norse poems, and the Prose Edda, a 13th-century work by the scholar Snorri Sturluson that systematized these older, often contradictory tales. Together, they paint a picture of an end so thorough and catastrophic that it feels less like a myth and more like a deeply ingrained cultural memory of absolute zero. The prophecy begins not with a bang, but with a long, suffocating silence. 3 successive winters will arrive without any summer in between, a period known as Fimbul winter. The sun and moon will grow dim and eventually be devoured by 2 monstrous wolves, Skirl and Hati, plunging the 9 worlds into an abyssal darkness. This is a primal environmental fear made manifest: the failure of the climate, the death of the seasons, the loss of the very celestial bodies that order time and life. In this perpetual night, the bonds of society will also snap. Brother will kill brother, kinship and oaths will be forgotten, and a great age of axe, sword, and wind will descend upon humanity. This social collapse is presented as a direct consequence of the environmental one. When the world grows cold, so too do the hearts of men. This chaos is the signal for the forces of chaos to break their chains. Loki, the trickster god, bound with the entrails of his own son as punishment for orchestrating the death of the beloved god Balder, will break free. So too will his monstrous children, the enormous wolf Fenrir, who was bound by a magical ribbon forged by the dwarves, and Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, so large it encircles the entire world and bites its own tail. They will be joined by a legion of fire giants from Muspelheim, led by the blazing figure of Surtur, and Loki will steer a ship made from the untrimmed nails of the dead, Naglfar, carrying the inhabitants of Hell itself. It is a coalition of every slighted, imprisoned, and vengeful force in the universe, all rising up simultaneously against the stronghold of the gods, Asgard. What follows is not a battle of good versus evil in a simple sense, but a final, fatal reckoning for a system built on flawed foundations. The gods, the Aesir, are not purely benevolent. Their history is stained with broken oaths, questionable judgments, and a reliance on force to maintain order. Odin, the All-Father, is a god of wisdom and poetry, but also of deception and warfare. His own actions, his relentless pursuit of knowledge to stave off this very fate, have ironically helped weave the threads of destiny that lead to it. The great battle is a series of personal, tragic duels. The noble god Freyr, having given away his magical sword for love, will fall to the fire giant Surtur. The one-handed god of justice Tyr will fight and be killed by Garm, the hound of hell, a fitting end for a god whose story involves a broken promise. Thor, the protector of mankind, will achieve his greatest feat by finally slaying the monstrous Jörmungandr, but he will take only 9 steps after his victory before succumbing to the serpent's venom. And Odin himself will be devoured by the wolf Fenrir, only to be avenged moments later by his son Vidar, who will tear the beast's jaw apart. The world itself does not survive. The earth shakes violently, the stars fall from the sky, and Surtur's flames engulf the world, burning everything in a purifying fire. Finally, the land itself sinks beneath the rising waves. Yet, here is the crucial, hope-filled twist in the Norse worldview that separates Ragnarök from mere nihilism. From the waters, a new, green world will emerge, fresh and fertile. A new sun, the daughter of the old one, will warm the land. A handful of gods will survive the inferno, including Odin's son Vidar and Thor's sons Modi and Magni, who will inherit their father's mighty hammer, Mjolnir. Most importantly, 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, will emerge from hiding within the world tree Yggdrasil, and from them a new race of humanity will repopulate this reborn earth. The cycle begins again, not because the gods were perfect, but precisely because they were not. The Norse didn't believe in avoiding Ragnarök. They believed in meeting it with courage and in building something new from the ashes. This myth was their way of internalizing the immense vulnerabilities of their existence. The harsh winters, the thin line between life and death at sea, the constant threat of conflict, and transforming that anxiety into a powerful narrative about resilience. It taught that even total destruction is not the end, but a necessary phase of renewal, a concept that must have provided profound comfort in the face of an uncertain and often brutal world. While the Norse envisioned their end as a fiery battle of gods and monsters, the ancient Maya of Mesoamerica developed a far more intricate and mathematically precise vision of time cycles, one that culminated in a modern-day frenzy of misinterpretation. The world held its breath as December 21st, 2012 approached, fueled by Hollywood blockbusters and sensationalist books predicting global cataclysm. But this popular understanding couldn't have been further from the sophisticated Maya worldview. For them, the end of the 13th Bacton, a cycle of 144,000 days in their long-count calendar, was not a prophecy of fire and brimstone, but a moment of profound cosmic transition. It marked the completion of a vast era, a little over 5,125 years, and the potential beginning of the next. Think of it less like a clock striking midnight on doomsday, and more like the odometer of the universe rolling over to a new million-mile mark. It was a time of potential renewal, of realignment, a moment when the celestial gears of existence shifted into a new configuration. This concept of cyclical time is absolutely central to understanding not just their calendar, but their entire philosophy. Their creation myth, the Popol Vuh, describes a series of previous attempts by the gods to create humanity. Earlier worlds were populated by flawed beings, first animals that couldn't speak their names, then mud people that dissolved, and wooden people that were hollow and mindless. Each of these iterations was ultimately destroyed, cleared away to make room for a new experiment. The world we inhabit now is simply the latest and most successful version. This narrative of trial, error, and reset is baked into their cosmic DNA, suggesting a deep cultural awareness that civilizations, like worlds, are not permanent. They are phases in an endless cycle of creation, dissolution, and rebirth. This mythological framework likely served as a profound mirror to the very real challenges the Maya faced. At the peak of the classic period, between 200 and 900 CE, their civilization was a dazzling tapestry of powerful city-states like Tikal, Palenque, and Calakmul. They built towering pyramids that scraped the sky, perfected a complex writing system, and made breathtaking advances in astronomy and mathematics. But by around 900 CE, the heart of this vibrant civilization in the southern lowlands had ceased to function. The great stone cities were silently reclaimed by the jungle. This wasn't a single, sudden event, but a gradual collapse, and archaeology points to a devastating confluence of factors. Decades of intense drought, likely exacerbated by deforestation, crippled their agricultural base. Endemic warfare between rival kingdoms drained resources and destabilized regions. Elite classes may have grown disconnected from the populace, their demands for tribute and labor for monumental projects becoming unsustainable. The myths encoded in their art and the Popol Vuh can be read as a timeless warning emerging from these historical realities. Their stories of worlds being wiped clean because their inhabitants failed to honor the gods could be a mythological translation of very earthly consequences. A society collapsing because it failed to live in balance with its environment, because it prioritized warfare and monument building over sustainability, because its social fabric unraveled under the strain of overpopulation and resource depletion. The prophecy of 2012, then, even in its misunderstood modern form, serves a crucial purpose. It reminds us that ancient fears are not so different from our own. The Maya anxiety about their world ending through environmental crisis, social strife, or divine displeasure resonates deeply in our era of climate change, political polarization, and ecological concern. Their calendar's end was not a prediction, but a profound philosophical statement. That time is cyclical, that civilizations are fragile, and that the greatest threat to our existence is often our own failure to live in harmony with the world and each other. This lesson in cyclical awareness and humility connects seamlessly to an even older story of divine retribution, one that emerged from the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. Long before a righteous man named Noah was instructed to build an ark, another ancient hero received a similar divine warning, a story etched not in a holy book, but onto fragile clay tablets in the cradle of civilization itself. We find our next profound warning in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving pieces of literature in the world. The tale is presented as the account of Utnapishtim, the one man granted eternal life by the gods, whom the hero King Gilgamesh seeks out in his own desperate quest to conquer mortality. Utnapishtim's story is one of survival, but it begins with a decision of absolute annihilation. The Council of Gods, led by the irritable Enlil, grows weary of humanity. Their specific grievance is fascinating and deeply revealing. The text says the gods were disturbed by the clamor, the relentless noise and uproar of the human population. In a world without industrial machinery, this noise was the sound of civilization itself, the bustle of crowded cities, the constant construction, the arguments and celebrations of a species that had multiplied and spread across the land. To the gods, this was the sound of chaos, a disruption of the natural and divine order they had established. It was a symptom of overpopulation, of a world becoming too full, too loud, and too difficult to manage. Enlil convinces the divine assembly that the only solution is total eradication, a great flood to wipe the slate clean and return the world to a silent, watery void. But one god, the god of wisdom and fresh water, disagrees with this collective punishment. In a brilliant act of divine subterfuge, he cannot directly warn a human, as that would defy the will of the council. Instead, he speaks to the wall of Utnapishtim's reed house, knowing the man inside will overhear. His message is a masterclass in cryptic instruction, a set of riddles that guide Utnapishtim to his salvation. He tells him to abandon his wealth to seek life and to build a boat of specific dimensions to take the seed of all living creatures aboard. Utnapishtim, a loyal subject of the city of Shuruppak, doesn't hesitate. He immediately gathers craftsmen and builders, and in just 7 days they construct a vast cube-shaped vessel, waterproofed with bitumen. He loads it with his family, his craftsmen, and all the animals he can gather. Then the storm arrives. For 6 days and 7 nights, a tempest of unimaginable fury rages. The text describes a darkness so complete that people cannot see each other, and the very gods of the storm tear through the land, flattening everything in their path. The devastation is so terrifying that even the gods themselves recoil in horror, huddling like frightened dogs and weeping at what they have unleashed. The goddess Ishtar screams like a woman in childbirth, lamenting that her own words in the divine assembly led to this tragedy, the turning of her precious children into mere clay. This moment is crucial. It shows that the myth is not a simple story of good and evil, or even of pure justice. It is a story of catastrophic miscalculation, of a punishment that far exceeded its purpose, and of the profound regret that can follow a rash decision. The gods in their power are portrayed as impulsive, flawed, and capable of immense error. After the storm subsides, Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on Mount Nisir. He sends out a dove which returns, finding no place to land. He sends a swallow which also returns. Finally, he sends a raven which does not return, signaling that the waters have receded and land has emerged. His first act upon leaving the boat is to offer a sacrifice to the hungry gods, who swarm around the sweet smell of the offering like flies. This story, inscribed on tablets dating back to 2100 BCE, is far more than a thrilling adventure. For the people of Mesopotamia, living in the fertile but violently unpredictable land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, floods were a constant and existential threat. Their entire agricultural society was built on the rich silt deposited by annual floods. but a particularly bad season could wipe out villages, drown entire populations, and destroy a year's food supply in days. The Epic of Gilgamesh gave this terrifying, recurring reality a narrative and a purpose. It wasn't just random nature, it was a potential expression of divine displeasure. The noise of humanity could be interpreted as the stresses of early urbanization. The first cities were emerging in this region, and with them came new problems: resource management, social stratification, sanitation, and the sheer difficulty of organizing thousands of people in a concentrated area. The flood myth served as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of overexpansion and losing harmony with the natural world and the divine order. It taught that civilization was a fragile agreement, one that could be revoked by the gods if humans became too disruptive, too arrogant, or too numerous. The fact that nearly every culture around the world, from the Greeks to the Hindus to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, has a version of a great flood myth suggests a shared, deep-seated human memory of some primordial catastrophe, perhaps the rapid sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. But for each culture, the story was adapted to carry its own specific warnings. For the Sumerians and Babylonians, it was a story about the precarity of their urban, agricultural world, a reminder that their greatest blessing, the fertile rivers, could also be the instrument of their utter destruction if they failed to live rightly. Leaving the river valleys of Mesopotamia behind, we now travel to the sun-drenched slopes of Mount Parnassus in Greece, to the very navel of the ancient world. Here at the sanctuary of Delphi, a different kind of warning system operated, one not of catastrophic floods or world-ending battles, but of enigmatic psychological warfare waged against human pride. The oracle at Delphi was not merely a fortune teller. She was the most powerful political and spiritual institution in the Greek world for centuries, a living embodiment of the divine, warning that no mortal, no matter how powerful, was beyond the reach of consequence. The process was as terrifying as it was revered. The Pythia, the priestess who served as the oracle's vessel, would descend into a subterranean chamber, perch atop a sacred tripod cauldron, and inhale vapors that were said to rise from a fissure in the earth, vapors that modern geology suggests could have been ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling anesthetic that induces a trance-like state. Chewing laurel leaves sacred to Apollo, the god of prophecy who presided over Delphi, she would slip into a possessed frenzy, uttering guttural cries and fragmented phrases. These chaotic sounds were then interpreted and versified by a team of male priests who delivered the final, often devastatingly ambiguous, prophecy to the anxious rulers and commoners who had journeyed from every corner of the Mediterranean seeking guidance. The most famous and tragic example of this system in action is the story of King Croesus of Lydia, a monarch of legendary wealth who ruled in the 6th century BCE. Feeling threatened by the rising power of Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire, Croesus sought the oracle's blessing for a preemptive attack. He first tested the oracles of the world, sending emissaries to ask what he would be doing on a specific day. Only the Pythia at Delphi gave the correct, bizarrely precise answer. He would be cooking a tortoise and a lamb in a bronze pot. Convinced of her authenticity, he then asked his real question: should he wage war on Persia? The oracle's reply was a masterstroke of fatal ambiguity. She declared that if Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. Flush with confidence, hearing only what he wanted to hear, Croesus launched his invasion. He was decisively defeated. His capital, Sardis, fell to Cyrus. As he awaited execution on a funeral pyre, he supposedly cried out the name of the oracle, feeling bitterly deceived. Cyrus, intrigued, asked him to tell the story. Upon hearing it, the Persian king spared Croesus's life, perhaps seeing in the tale a lesson about the fickleness of fate and the dangers of pride. The great empire Croesus destroyed was his own. This story perfectly encapsulates the Delphic warning mechanism. It was not designed to give clear, simple answers. It was designed to make the seeker confront their own assumptions, their own arrogance, and their own interpretation of fate. The oracle held up a mirror, and the recipient's doom often came from gazing into it and seeing only their own desires reflected back. The messages were psychological traps for the hubristic. Another powerful example involves the Athenians themselves during the Persian Wars. When the vast fleet of Xerxes approached, the Athenians were told to trust their wooden walls. A fierce debate erupted. Some argued this meant to fortify the Acropolis with a wooden palisade, but the visionary leader Themistocles argued it was a metaphor for their navy, their triremes. He persuaded them, and the resulting victory at the Battle of Salamis saved Greece. However, generations later, during the Peloponnesian War, Athens, at the height of its imperial power, grew increasingly arrogant. They dismissed warnings, subjugated their allies, and expanded aggressively. The historian Thucydides documents how this hubris led to their eventual defeat by Sparta. While not a direct result of ignoring a specific prophecy, their downfall was a fulfillment of the broader Delphic principle that success breeds arrogance, and arrogance invites nemesis, the divine retribution for overstepping one's bounds. The very existence of the oracle at Delphi reveals a profound and sophisticated cultural innovation. The Greeks, for all their celebration of human achievement in philosophy, art, and politics, institutionalized a system of radical self-critique. At the very heart of their world was a voice that constantly whispered to the powerful, "You are not a god, your plans are fragile, your understanding is limited." The two most famous phrases inscribed on the temple at Delphi were, "Know thyself," and "Nothing in excess." These were not quaint bits of advice. They were the foundational pillars of a worldview that understood civilization itself as a delicate balance that could be overturned by a single act of overweening pride. The oracle was the guardian of that balance, a check on the unchecked ambition of kings and city-states. It taught that the greatest danger to any civilization is not an external enemy, but the internal decay of its own wisdom and humility. This profound understanding of cyclical rise and fall, driven by internal moral and psychological factors, finds a powerful echo in a much older and vast spiritual tradition from the Indian subcontinent. This profound Greek understanding of civilization as a psychological balancing act, constantly threatened by its own success, finds a stunningly parallel concept in the ancient wisdom of India, but on a scale that encompasses not just human history, but the entire cosmos. Hindu cosmology presents time not as a linear march toward a single conclusion, but as an endless, breathing rhythm of creation, preservation, and dissolution. At the heart of this vast temporal architecture is the concept of the yugas, four immense ages that cycle with the inevitability of the seasons, each one progressively darker than the last, leading society toward an inevitable nadir before the universe resets itself in a new golden age. This is not a myth of a single event, but a grand, metaphysical diagnosis of the life cycle of reality itself, and our current position within it is particularly telling. The cycle begins with the Satya Yuga, a golden age of truth and perfection. In this era, humanity is intrinsically virtuous, living in perfect harmony with the cosmic law, or Dharma, which is visualized as a bull standing firmly on all four legs. The atmosphere is pure, lifespans are long, and the human spirit is so elevated that it can directly perceive the divine. There is no need for governments or religions. Truth and righteousness are the natural state of being. This era gives way to the Treta Yuga, the Silver Age, where Dharma is reduced by 1/4, now standing on 3 legs. A subtle decline begins. The first signs of ignorance and desire appear, and with them, the need for rituals and sacrifices to maintain spiritual connection. Climate becomes slightly less hospitable, and human virtue, while still dominant, requires more conscious effort to uphold. Next comes the Dvapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, where Dharma is balanced on only 2 legs. The decline accelerates dramatically. The climate becomes harsher, human lifespans shorten, and diseases emerge. People become increasingly divided, not just by differing opinions, but by a growing attachment to material wealth and pleasure. Sacred knowledge, once universally understood, begins to be forgotten and must be codified into scriptures to be preserved. This brings us with a profound and unsettling resonance to our current age, the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age, the Age of Strife. In this era, Dharma is crippled, standing on just a single leg. The great Indian epic, the Mahabharata, and texts like the Vishnu Purana offer a chillingly precise prophecy of what life in this age would be like, and it reads less like an ancient myth and more like a nightly news broadcast. They foretold a time where rulers would become corrupt and predatory, taxing their people unjustly and acting like thieves rather than protectors. The weather would become unpredictable and violent, with failing monsoons and frequent droughts leading to food shortages. Society would be characterized by rampant greed, where wealth alone is mistaken for virtue. People would become short-sighted, irritable, and addicted to base pleasures. Families would break down, with generations turning against one another. Teachers would be disrespected, students would disregard their lessons, and false gurus would rise to prominence, selling easy answers. Most strikingly, the texts predict that in the Kali Yuga, the average human lifespan will be greatly reduced, and people will be plagued by stress, anxiety, and a constant, low-grade suffering. What is most remarkable about this myth is its psychological and societal insight. The Kali Yuga is not merely a period of external catastrophe imposed by angry gods. It is a state of being that humanity collectively brings upon itself through a million small choices that erode ethical foundations. The weakening of Dharma is not a punishment, it is a consequence. It is the cumulative result of prioritizing profit over people, short-term gain over long-term sustainability, and individual desire over collective well-being. The myth is a sophisticated model of civilizational decay, identifying the internal rot, the moral and spiritual decline, as the primary cause of the external collapse that follows in the form of war, famine, and natural disaster. Yet, for all its bleakness, the concept of the Kali Yuga is not a counsel for despair. It is, paradoxically, a profound call to action. The texts explain that even a small amount of spiritual practice in this dark age yields immense results, far greater than the efforts required in the Golden Age. The very difficulty of the time makes every act of integrity, compassion, and self-discipline incredibly potent. The myth teaches that while the cyclical decline of the entire age is inevitable on a cosmic scale, the experience of the individual within it is not predetermined. By consciously choosing to uphold Dharma in our own lives, we can not only navigate the age with personal grace, but also mitigate its harshness for those around us, creating pockets of Satya Yuga in a world sliding into Kali. This timeless wisdom, linking the moral state of the individual directly to the health of the entire cosmos, offers a powerful lens through which to view our own modern challenges, from political polarization to ecological crisis, suggesting that the solutions must begin with an internal realignment before they can manifest in the external world. This journey from the vast cyclical time of India leads us now to a very different yet equally haunting warning from the misty hills and ancient forests of the Celtic world. From the cosmic cycles of the Hindu yugas, we now journey to the misty shores and emerald hills of ancient Ireland, to a myth that trades vast epochs of time for a single, heartbreaking moment of personal tragedy. A story that captures the silent, creeping collapse of a culture not with fire and flood, but with the gentle, devastating touch of a foot upon native soil. The Irish myth of Tir na an Og, the land of youth, is a poignant and deeply melancholic warning about the perils of nostalgia and the irreversible nature of time, particularly for a people who have watched their world transform beyond recognition. The story centers on the Fianna, a legendary band of warrior hunters who served the High King of Ireland, and their greatest poet, Oisin, son of their renowned leader Fionn mac Cumhaill. While hunting on the coast, the Fianna are approached by a figure of breathtaking beauty, a woman riding a magnificent white horse. She introduces herself as Niamh of the golden hair, a princess from a land across the sea where time does not exist, where there is no sickness, no death, and no sorrow. This paradise is Tir na an Og. She has come specifically for Oisin, having fallen in love with him through his reputation for bravery and poetry. She offers him a choice: remain in this world of aging and struggle, or come with her to a land of eternal youth and joy. Enchanted by her beauty and the promise of this perfect realm, Oisin climbs onto the horse behind her, and they gallop across the waves, leaving the shores of Ireland behind. His time in Tir na an Og is everything Niamh promised. The landscape is perpetually lush and vibrant, the feasts are endless, and the company is always joyful. He and Niamh marry and have children, yet even in this paradise, a subtle yearning begins to grow in Oisin's heart. After what feels like 3 blissful years, he is seized by a powerful homesickness, a desire to see his father, his comrades, and the familiar hills of Ireland once more. Niamh, with a heavy heart, agrees to let him visit but gives him one absolute, non-negotiable command: he must not dismount from the magical white horse. If his feet ever touch the soil of Ireland, he can never return to Tir na an Og, and the consequences will be dire. Oisin agrees and rides back across the sea. But when he arrives, he finds a country he barely recognizes. The great fortresses are in ruins, overgrown with moss and ivy. The people seem smaller, weaker, and more fearful. He asks for news of Fionn mac Cumhaill and the Fianna, only to be met with bewildered stares. To these people, the Fianna are not recent history. They are ancient legends, heroes from a misty, mythical past 300 years gone. In his 3 years in the land of youth, 3 centuries have passed in Ireland. The civilization he knew, the warrior culture of the Fianna, has utterly collapsed, eroded by time, and likely by the arrival of new peoples and new customs. The old Ireland is gone, existing only in songs and stories. The tragedy reaches its climax when Oisin, riding through this strange land, sees a group of men struggling to lift a large stone slab. Moved by the chivalric code of the Fianna to help those in need, he leans over from his saddle to shift the stone with his great strength. In that moment, the girth of his saddle, aged and rotten by the centuries, snaps. Oisin tumbles from the horse, and his body makes contact with the earth of Ireland. Instantly, the magic of Tir na an Og is broken. Time, held at bay for 3 centuries, crashes down upon him all at once. He does not simply age, he withers, transforming from a youth in his prime into an ancient, blind, and frail old man on the verge of death. The white horse, freed, gallops away, lost to him forever. The myth is a masterful allegory for cultural collapse, particularly the Celtic experience. The Celts of Ireland, Gaul, and Britain faced relentless pressure from the Roman Empire and later from Saxon and Norman invasions. Their native traditions, languages, and social structures were systematically suppressed, assimilated, or simply faded away under the weight of a new dominant culture. Oisin's return is the attempt of any displaced people to reconnect with their roots, only to find that those roots have been paved over. The homeland of memory no longer exists. His fatal mistake was not a violent act of hubris, but an act of kindness performed using the old ways in a new world that had no place for them. The breaking saddle strap symbolizes the fragile, decaying connection to that past, a connection that can no longer bear the weight of the present. The myth warns that you cannot go home again, not because the place has changed, but because you have become a relic of a world that has vanished. It cautions against the paralyzing power of nostalgia, which can prevent a people from adapting to new realities, ultimately leading to their cultural demise if they remain fixated on a past that is forever out of reach. Oisin's story is a tearful elegy for a lost way of life, a silent collapse documented not in history books, but in the heartache of a single doomed hero. This poignant meditation on loss and the irreversible flow of time finds a stark counterpoint in a much older, far more violent narrative of divine anger from the banks of the Nile. From the Celtic lament for a lost golden age, we plunge into the scorching, unforgiving heat of the Egyptian desert, where the sun god Ra, the creator and king of the gods, makes a decision that will very nearly unmake his own creation. This is not a story of gradual decay or cultural erosion, but a swift, brutal, and terrifyingly intimate narrative of divine fury and the razor-thin line between order and absolute chaos. The myth, known as the destruction of mankind, is preserved in the funerary texts found in the tombs of New Kingdom pharaohs like Seti I and Ramesses VI, most completely in the Book of the Heavenly Cow. It begins not with humanity at its low point, but at its peak of ingratitude. Ra, now an old man who rules from the celestial realm, has watched the human race he fashioned from the tears of his eye grow increasingly rebellious. They have begun to mock his aged frailty, to question his authority, and to plot against him. This is the ultimate betrayal, a child turning against its parent, a creation conspiring against its creator. For a culture that viewed the pharaoh as the living embodiment of Ra on earth, this myth served as a powerful political warning. Dissent against the god-king was not just treason, it was a cosmic crime that invited universal repercussions. Enraged by this insolence, Ra convenes a council of the gods. He does not ask for their permission, but for their counsel on how to respond. The gods, shockingly, agree with his assessment. Humanity must be punished. The instrument of this punishment is chosen with a kind of dreadful logic. Ra calls upon his own eye, a powerful, independent entity in Egyptian mythology often associated with a vengeful goddess. He sends forth his eye in the form of the lioness goddess Sekhmet, whose very name means the powerful one. She is the embodiment of untamed, destructive force, a being of pure, concentrated fury. What follows is not a battle, it is a slaughter. Sekhmet descends to the earth and begins a methodical, joyous rampage. She wades into the human population, her sleek lioness form moving with terrifying grace, her claws and teeth rending flesh. The deserts run red with blood. She is not merely executing a sentence, she is lost in the ecstasy of her own power, the taste of blood fueling an insatiable bloodlust. The initial act of justice transforms into an uncontrollable orgy of violence that threatens to annihilate the entire human race. This is the myth's first profound lesson. Punitive power, once unleashed, can quickly spiral beyond its original intent and become a self-perpetuating force of pure chaos, devouring everything in its path, including the very order it was meant to protect. Back in the divine realm, Ra watches the carnage and undergoes a dramatic change of heart. His anger cools, replaced by a surge of pity and paternal regret. He realizes that total annihilation was never his true desire. He wanted to correct his children, not exterminate them. But how do you stop a force of nature you have unleashed? Sekhmet is now drunk on power and blood, and she will not stop until her task is complete. Ra must now use cunning to avert the very catastrophe he ordained. He devises a clever, desperate plan. He orders his messengers to rush to the island of Elephantine to fetch a vast quantity of red ochre, a mineral that stains the earth a deep, blood-red color. Meanwhile, he commands the priestesses of the sun god at Heliopolis to brew thousands of gallons of beer, mixing the red ochre into the brew until it resembles a vast lake of blood. This crimson beer is then poured out across the fields of Egypt, precisely in the path of the rampaging Sekhmet. As dawn breaks, the lioness goddess sees this immense red pool and, in her blood madness, mistakes it for the gore of her victims. She bends down and begins to lap it up voraciously, gulping down the intoxicating mixture. The beer is so potent that she quickly becomes drowsy, her rage subsiding into a stupor. She falls into a deep, peaceful sleep and awakes later as Hathor, the benevolent goddess of love, music, and motherhood, the gentle counterpart to her own violent nature. Humanity is saved not by force but by cleverness, compassion, and a symbolic act of substitution. This myth operates on multiple levels, each one a layer of warning for Egyptian society. On the theological level, it explains the inherent duality of the divine. Sekhmet and Hathor are two sides of the same coin, representing the terrifying and gentle aspects of the same goddess. The lesson is that the gods are not simplistic moral figures. They contain the capacity for both life-giving benevolence and life-destroying fury, and it is humanity's duty to keep them in their benevolent aspect through proper respect and ritual. On a political level, the story is a masterwork of state propaganda. The pharaoh was the intermediary between gods and men, the guardian of Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, justice, and balance. The rebellion of humanity against Ra was a metaphor for rebellion against the pharaoh's authority. The myth taught that such rebellion would unleash uncontrollable chaos isfet upon the entire land, and only the divine wisdom of the god-king, here Ra's clever solution, could restore order. It was a powerful argument for absolute obedience to the throne, but perhaps most compelling is the historical and environmental interpretation. Scholars suggest this bloodthirsty saga may encode a collective memory of a real, terrifying historical crisis. Egypt's existence depended entirely on the predictable annual flooding of the Nile. A failure of the inundation or an unusually low flood could lead to catastrophic famine, which in turn could lead to social unrest, violence, and a complete breakdown of the social order, a descent into a Sekhmet-like chaos. The story's resolution, with the red beer averting disaster, could be a mythological representation of the Nile's life-giving waters finally arriving, their reddish hue stained by silt, ending the famine and restoring life and order. The myth, therefore, becomes a narrative about the fragility of civilization in the face of environmental disaster and the absolute necessity of centralized authority and religious ritual to maintain the balance that keeps the chaos of nature at bay. It is a stark reminder that collapse is often just one failed harvest away, and survival depends on wisdom, timely intervention, and a return to harmonious balance. This theme of maintaining harmony with the natural world to avoid catastrophe finds a powerful and deeply spiritual echo in the prophecies of the indigenous peoples of the American Southwest. Leaving the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt, we now travel across the ocean and deep into the high desert mesas of the American Southwest to the ancient pueblos of the Hopi people. Here we find a prophetic tradition that is not confined to a single story of the past, but is a living, breathing dialogue with the future, a continuous warning passed down through generations not in written texts, but in the sacred memory of elders. The Hopi worldview is fundamentally cyclical, much like the Hindu concept of the yugas, but it is grounded in the specific, stark landscape they have inhabited for over 1,000 years. They believe we are currently living in the fourth world, or Tuwakachi. The previous three worlds were each destroyed because humanity lost its way, succumbing to corruption, greed, and a catastrophic disconnect from the spiritual laws of creation. The first was ended by fire, the second by ice, and the third by a great flood. The survivors from that third world were guided by Mosor, the guardian of the earth and a spirit of death and renewal, to this harsh but beautiful fourth world. They were given a simple, profound covenant: live a life of humility, peace, and reverence for the earth, and this world would sustain you. Stray from that path, and this world too will meet a devastating end. The Hopi prophecies for this current age are not vague mystical pronouncements. They are startlingly specific, a series of signs that would signal humanity's departure from the righteous path and the approaching culmination of the cycle. One of the most famous warnings is the arrival of a gourd of ashes that would fall from the sky, which would make the rivers boil and bring a terrible sickness that medicine could not cure. To any modern listener, this is an unmistakable description of nuclear weapons and the aftermath of radiation poisoning. Another sign speaks of a giant spider web that would be built across the land, a clear allusion to the global network of power lines, telephone wires, and now the internet. They spoke of houses in the sky, airplanes, and of people talking across great distances through a web of wires. They warned of a twisting of the cross, a symbol that some interpreters believe refers to the swastika, a sacred symbol to the Hopi that was horrifically co-opted by the Nazis, or more broadly to the corruption of spiritual symbols for violent ends. Perhaps the most poignant sign is the prophecy of the youth with the yellow hair, who would briefly return to the Hopi to learn their ancient wisdom, only to abandon it for the seductive but empty ways of a modern, materialistic world. These signs are not meant to be a passive countdown to doom. They are a diagnostic tool, a checklist of moral and spiritual failures. The core of the Hopi warning is that the coming collapse is not an arbitrary punishment from an angry god, but the direct, inevitable consequence of a way of life that is out of balance with natural law. The environmental abuse, the incessant warfare, the spiritual decline, these are the causes, not merely the symptoms. The Hopi have watched for centuries as colonial forces and then modern industrial society enacted the very behaviors their prophecies cautioned against: strip mining the earth for resources, poisoning the water and air, prioritizing technological advancement over community well-being, and waging war for land and power. Their prophecies are a powerful critique of unsustainable practices, born from a deep ecological wisdom that understands the earth not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living, sacred relative to be honored. This is why the Hopi have been historically resilient, enduring droughts, conflicts, and immense external pressure to assimilate. Their survival strategy is encoded in their prophecies, a steadfast commitment to their ceremonies, which are designed to maintain the balance of the world, a deeply communal and agricultural way of life, and a profound ethic of peace. They famously never declared war against the United States, and their warriors were traditionally caretakers and defenders, not aggressors. Their entire cultural framework is a blueprint for avoiding the collapse they prophesied. They do not see the end as an absolute extinction event, but as a purification, a necessary cleansing that will make way for the emergence of a fifth world for those who have held true to the original instructions. The Hopi prophecy is ultimately a call to consciousness. It asks us to look at the world we have built, the boiling rivers of industrial pollution, the twisted crosses of ideological extremism, the spiritual sickness of materialism, and recognize that we are living the warning right now. It is a profound example of how mythology can serve as the conscience of a culture, and in this case, a conscience for all of humanity, urging a return to harmony before the cycle completes itself. This indigenous insight into the direct link between moral decay and societal collapse finds a starkly different, yet thematically parallel, story in the very heart of the classical world, with a tale that launched a republic. While the Hopi prophecies warn of a civilization's collapse through a gradual erosion of spiritual and environmental balance, the founders of the Roman Republic told a story of collapse that was swift, personal, and politically explosive, a single act of violence that served as the catalyst for the complete overthrow of a government. The myth of Lucretia is not a tale of gods and monsters, but a deeply human drama of honor, shame, and revolution, a story so powerful it was used for centuries to explain and justify the birth of the Roman Republic itself. Our sources for this legend are the historian Livy and the poet Ovid, writing during the reign of Emperor Augustus, a time when the very meaning of the Roman Republic was being fervently debated and redefined. The story is set in the late 6th century B.C.E., during the reign of Rome's seventh and final king, the tyrannical Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. The stage is set not on a battlefield, but during a leisurely military camp conversation among noblemen, including the king's son, Sextus Tarquinius. They are debating the virtues of their respective wives, and to settle the argument, they decide to ride back to Rome unannounced to see what the women are doing in their absence. While the wives of the other men are found feasting and socializing, they discover Lucretia, the wife of Collatinus, working diligently at her wool by lamplight, surrounded by her busy maidservants. Her virtue and dedication are so evident that she shames the other women, and Sextus Tarquinius is immediately consumed by a destructive and obsessive lust for her. A few days later, Sextus returns to Collatinus's house alone. He is received as a guest and friend of the family, given hospitality and a place to sleep. In the dead of night, while the household slumbers, he enters Lucretia's chamber with his sword drawn. What follows is a harrowing psychological battle. He confesses his desire, and when she rejects him, he shifts tactics. He threatens to kill her, but she refuses to yield, declaring that death is preferable to dishonor. Then he unveils his most devastating weapon. He tells her he will not only kill her, but also slay a male slave and place his naked body next to hers in the morning. He will claim he discovered them in an adulterous act and killed them both in a fit of righteous fury. In that single moment, Lucretia is trapped. Her choice is not between life and death, but between two different kinds of death: a private, honorable death by his sword, or a public, shameful death that will destroy not only her own reputation but bring eternal disgrace upon her entire family. To a Roman matron for whom family honor was everything, the second option was unthinkable. To save her family's name, she submits. The next day, after Sextus has left, she sends urgent messages to her father and her husband, who return with their companions, including the nobleman Lucius Junius Brutus. They find her sitting in her room, overwhelmed with grief. She tells them the entire story, naming her attacker, and despite their immediate attempts to comfort her, insisting that the guilt lies solely with Sextus, she is inconsolable. She then draws a concealed dagger and plunges it into her heart, declaring, "Never shall Lucretia provide a precedent for unchaste women to escape what they deserve." Her suicide is not an act of despair in the modern sense. It is a radical, public act of protest. It is the only way she can reclaim her honor and, more importantly, transform her body from a site of private shame into a public symbol of outrage. As she dies, Brutus pulls the bloody dagger from her wound and holds it aloft. In that instant, he sheds the simpleton persona he had cultivated to survive under the tyrannical Tarquins and reveals himself as a man of fierce resolve. He swears an oath upon Lucretia's body, calling upon the gods to witness his vow to drive the Tarquin family from Rome forever and to never allow another king to rule. Her body is then carried into the public forum, where Brutus displays it to the Roman people and recounts the story of Sextus's crime and Lucretia's sacrifice. The populace, already simmering with resentment against Tarquin's oppressive rule, erupts in fury. They rally to Brutus's cause, expel the royal family, and establish a new form of government, the Roman Republic, governed by two annually elected consuls, the first of whom were Brutus and Collatinus. This myth served an absolutely crucial purpose for the Romans. It provided a foundational, moral justification for the violent overthrow of their monarchy. It transformed a political revolution into a righteous crusade, framing the Republic not as a power grab by disgruntled aristocrats, but as a necessary response to a profound moral failure at the highest level of the old order. The rape of Lucretia symbolized the tyranny of the king himself. His son's violation of a citizen's home and body was a microcosm of the king's violation of the state's laws and the citizen's rights. Her suicide represented the ultimate sacrifice of the individual for the good of the community, a value the new republic would hold dear. For centuries afterward, Romans held up Lucretia as the ideal of female virtue and Brutus as the ideal of civic duty. But the myth's warning was twofold. On one hand, it celebrated the birth of the Republic. On the other, it served as a permanent cautionary tale for the powerful. It warned that the abuse of power, particularly the sexual and political corruption of the elite, could have catastrophic consequences, destabilizing the entire state. The later history of the Roman Empire, with its infamous tales of decadent and tyrannical emperors like Caligula and Nero, can be seen as a slow-motion replay of the Tarquin sin, a collective forgetting of the lesson learned from Lucretia's tragedy. The myth taught that a civilization's stability is built not just on laws and armies, but on the personal virtue of its citizens and leaders, and that when that virtue collapses, the entire political structure can come crashing down with terrifying speed. This Roman narrative of a single transgression triggering a seismic political shift offers a stark contrast to a creation story from the other side of the globe, which explores the consequences of a very different kind of overreach. From the grand political stage of Rome, where a single act of violation toppled a monarchy, we now voyage across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean to the islands of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a myth that explores a transgression of an entirely different order, not against a state, but against the very laws of nature itself. The Maori story of the demigod Moi and his ill-fated quest to conquer death is a masterful and deeply philosophical narrative that grapples with the most fundamental of human anxieties, offering a profound warning about the dangers of overreach and the vital importance of accepting natural limits. Unlike the epic, world-altering catastrophes we've seen in other myths, the consequence here is intimate, personal, and universal: the mortality of every single human being. Moi is a beloved and central figure in Polynesian mythology, a trickster hero of immense power and cunning. He is not a god in the remote Olympian sense, but a descendant of the gods who walks among humans, using his supernatural abilities to perform great feats for the benefit of humanity. It was Moi who used his magical fishhook to pull the North Island of New Zealand up from the depths of the ocean. It was Moi who, with the help of his brothers, lassoed the sun and beat it into submission, forcing it to slow its journey across the sky and give people longer days to work, fish, and cook. He is the ultimate culture hero, a benefactor who reshapes the world to make it more hospitable for people. This history of success, however, sets the stage for his greatest and most tragic failure. Having achieved so much, Moi turns his attention to the one remaining problem, death. He witnesses the grief that mortality brings, watching as people he loves are taken away to the underworld, to the realm of Pu-Terangi, the place of swirling mists never to return. He decides that this is an injustice, a flaw in the design of existence that he, the great Moi, can fix. He learns that the gateway to eternal life lies with Hein Nui Te Po, whose name means the Great Woman of the Night. She is a formidable and ancient goddess, the ruler of the underworld, and the guardian of the passage between life and death. She is both fearsome and sacred. Moi gathers his brothers and reveals his audacious plan. He will enter the body of the sleeping goddess as she slumbers, journey through her, and emerge from her mouth, thereby destroying death from the inside out and winning immortality for all humankind. His brothers are horrified, their fear a stark contrast to Moi's confidence. They try to dissuade him, warning of the goddess's terrible power, but Moi is dismissive, blinded by his own hubris and his unbroken string of victories. He brushes aside their concerns, mocking their fear and insisting that his own power is sufficient for the task. This moment is critical. It's the classic flaw of the hero who cannot recognize a limit he should not cross. The brothers reluctantly accompany Moi to the place where Hein Nui Te Po lies sleeping. The descriptions of her are awe-inspiring and terrifying. She is vast, her body like a mountain range, and instead of eyes, she has gleaming greenstone, while sharp, obsidian-like flakes of stone line her vagina, the very passage Moi intends to traverse. As they approach, Moi gives his brothers one final, crucial instruction. He tells them that on his journey through the goddess, they must remain absolutely silent. No matter what they see or hear, they cannot laugh or make a sound. His success and the fate of humanity depends on their solemnity. He begins his journey, transforming himself into a small, worm-like creature and entering the sleeping goddess. For a moment, it seems his impossible plan might actually work, but then the brothers witness something so bizarre, so utterly unexpected, that one of them cannot contain himself. Seeing this tiny, wriggling creature disappearing into the body of the gigantic goddess, he lets out a choked, startled laugh. It is not a laugh of malice, but one of sheer, nervous incredulity. That single, spontaneous sound is enough to shatter the sacred silence. Hein Nui Te Po awakens instantly. Realizing what is happening, she clamps her legs together with immense force, crushing Moi between the razor-sharp stones. The great hero, the slayer of the sun, the puller of islands, is killed instantly. His quest to conquer death ends with his own, and in that moment, he irrevocably confirms the very law he sought to break. His death is the final seal on human mortality. Because Moi failed, all humans must die. The myth is a breathtakingly sophisticated exploration of the human condition. On one level, it is an origin story for why we die, a theodicy that explains a fundamental and often painful aspect of reality. But on a much deeper level, it is a warning about the nature of ambition and the importance of boundaries. Moi's sin was not his desire to help humanity, but his refusal to accept a fundamental limit. Death is not presented as a punishment or a flaw. It is an intrinsic part of the natural order, the necessary counterpart to life. Hein Nui Te Po is not an evil villain to be defeated, but a sacred guardian of this balance. Moi's attempt to violate her, to bypass this natural process through a clever trick, was the ultimate act of arrogance, a failure to show respect for the tapu, the sacredness of the cosmic order. The lesson extends far beyond the individual to the societal. For the Māori and for any civilization, the myth teaches that there are forces and limits that must be respected. A society that believes it can endlessly exploit the natural world without consequence, or that technological innovation can solve every human problem, is replaying Moi's fatal error on a grand scale. It is the arrogance of believing we are exempt from the rules that govern all of existence. The quiet, humble fear of the brothers represents the voice of caution and tradition, the wisdom that understands some paths are too dangerous to walk. Moi's story is a poignant and timeless reminder that true strength lies not in conquering every limitation, but in knowing which boundaries define us and give our lives meaning. His failure bestowed upon humanity a mixed blessing, the sorrow of mortality, but also the preciousness that comes with finitude, urging us to live with purpose, respect, and humility within the beautiful, fragile world we inhabit. This profound Pacific wisdom in accepting the natural order finds a powerful parallel in a concept that shaped one of the world's longest-lasting civilizations, where the mandate to rule was itself seen as a force of nature. This profound Pacific wisdom in accepting the natural order, as embodied by Moi's fatal ambition, finds a powerful and systematic parallel in one of history's most enduring political philosophies, which itself became the mythological engine driving the cycle of Chinese dynasties for over 3,000 years. The Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, or Tiananmen, is a breathtakingly sophisticated fusion of myth, history, and political theory that provided a divine explanation for the most tumultuous events in human affairs, the collapse of empires and the violent transfer of power. Unlike the European notion of the divine right of kings, which suggested a monarch's authority was absolute and irrevocably granted by God, the mandate of heaven was profoundly conditional. It proposed that the supreme deity, heaven or Tian, bestowed the right to rule upon a dynasty only for as long as its emperors governed with virtue, justice, and compassion. The moment a ruler became corrupt, selfish, or incompetent, heaven would withdraw its favor, a revocation signaled not by a heavenly scroll or a thunderous voice, but through the very tangible disasters and rebellions that would inevitably tear the kingdom apart. This idea was not some abstract philosophical musing. It was a practical tool forged in the fires of a real historical revolution. Its first and most powerful application was to justify the overthrow of the Shang dynasty by the Zhou around 1046 CE. The Shang kings had ruled for centuries, claiming their authority descended from a powerful lineage of ancestor spirits. But the Zhou conquerors needed a more powerful argument to legitimize their rebellion against the established order. They argued that the last Shang king, Dai Xin, was a tyrant of legendary depravity, a man who filled pools with wine and forests of meat for his personal indulgence while his people starved, who invented cruel tortures for his enemies, and who was so lost in his own decadence that he ignored the suffering of his realm. This moral failure, the Zhou claimed, caused him to lose the virtue, or da, that was essential for ruling. Heaven, in its displeasure, therefore transferred its mandate to the virtuous Zhou leaders who had shown their fitness through their wise and benevolent governance. This narrative transformed the Zhou from mere usurpers into heaven's chosen instruments, performing a sacred duty to purge the land of an unworthy ruler. The collapse of the Shang was not a tragic accident, it was a cosmological correction. The genius of the mandate of heaven was in its built-in warning system. The signs of a failing mandate were terrifyingly clear and all too real for any emperor to ignore. A series of natural disasters, catastrophic floods that drowned entire provinces, prolonged droughts that withered crops and led to famine, or unexpected eclipses that darkened the sun were not seen as random meteorological events. They were interpreted as heaven's explicit disapproval, a cosmic critique of the emperor's performance. Similarly, widespread peasant rebellions, massive internal corruption, or military defeats were not just political problems, they were symptoms of a deeper spiritual decay at the very top. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, but this was a title fraught with peril. It meant he was the crucial link between the celestial and the earthly realms. His personal virtue was believed to maintain the harmony of the entire universe. If he failed in his duties, the entire natural order could be thrown into chaos. This created a powerful system of accountability, a constant check on the absolute power of the throne. An emperor might have commanded vast armies and wielded the power of life and death, but he always had to rule with one eye on the heavens and the other on the welfare of his people, knowing that his legitimacy was a lease, not a deed, and that the landlord was watching. This cyclical view of history, driven by the gaining and losing of the mandate, became the central rhythm of Chinese civilization. The rise and fall of dynasties, the Han, the Tang, the Song, the Ming were not seen as a linear progression or a random series of events, but as the inevitable unfolding of a natural and moral process. A new dynasty would rise, full of vigor and virtue, restoring order and prosperity. It would enjoy a golden age, but over generations, the ruling elite would often become complacent, disconnected from the people, and prone to the very corruption and luxury that had toppled their predecessors. The mandate would weaken, the signs would appear, and eventually a new force claiming the virtue of heaven would emerge to sweep the old order away and begin the cycle anew. This concept provided a remarkable stability to Chinese culture even amidst incredible political turmoil. The system itself was eternal, even if the players were temporary. It taught every successive ruler that arrogance and corruption were not just moral failings, they were existential threats that invited total downfall. This deeply ingrained myth, which seamlessly blended spiritual belief with practical statecraft, would go on to influence the political thought of Korea, Japan, and Vietnam for millennia, creating an East Asian worldview where good governance was not merely a practical concern, but a sacred, cosmic responsibility. This notion of a final, cosmic reckoning that requires active human participation to bring about a perfected world finds a fascinating and earlier expression in the ancient sands of Persia. This powerful Persian vision of a future forged by human hands presents a radical departure from many of the myths we've explored. While others warn of inevitable collapse as a divine punishment for past sins, Frashocrates offers a startlingly hopeful alternative. Collapse is not our destiny if we choose to fight for a better world. This concept emerges from the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, who lived in ancient Persia sometime between 1500 and 1000 B.C. And it is meticulously detailed in the sacred texts of the Avesta. At its core is a dualistic universe locked in a great cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of light, truth, and order, and his eternal adversary, Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of darkness, deceit, and chaos. This is not a distant, abstract battle fought only in the heavens. It is a war that rages within every human heart and in every corner of our world. Every lie told, every act of cruelty committed, every instance of neglect or pollution is a victory for the forces of chaos. Conversely, every truth spoken, every kindness shown, every effort to create and nourish is a blow struck for order and renewal. The ultimate culmination of this endless war is Frashocrates, a term often translated as the making wonderful or the final renovation. This is not an apocalypse of pure destruction, but a final, glorious purification. The myth describes a series of cataclysmic events. A great fire will sweep across the earth, melting the mountains and purging the world of imperfection. This is not a punishment but a cleansing, a cosmic refiner's fire that will burn away all falsehood and corruption, leaving only truth and goodness intact. The earth itself will be flattened and made perfect, and even the dead will be resurrected to participate in this renewed existence. But here is the most revolutionary and demanding aspect of the entire prophecy. This perfect future cannot be achieved by the gods alone. Ahura Mazda may have set the universe in motion and provided the framework, but its ultimate perfection depends entirely on humanity. We are not passive passengers awaiting salvation or doom. We are active, conscripted soldiers in the cosmic army of light. Our duty is to fight for Frashokrati every single day through our ethical choices. This is codified in the Zoroastrian maxim of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It is a holistic call to action that links our internal mental state, our speech, and our physical actions into a single, powerful force for renovation. A pure thought is a weapon against chaos. A truthful word is a bulwark against deceit. A charitable deed is a direct contribution to the final victory. This theology provided an incredibly powerful motivational framework for the great Persian empires, particularly the Achaemenids and later the Sasanians. The king was not just a political ruler, he was seen as a deputy of Ahura Mazda on earth, and his primary duty was to actively fight the lie, the drudge, which represented all forms of falsehood, chaos, and social disorder. Inscriptions from kings like Darius the Great at Behistun explicitly frame their military campaigns and administrative reforms not as mere conquests for wealth and power, but as a sacred duty to expel chaos from the world and establish order and truth. Building roads, establishing fair laws, and creating efficient bureaucracies were not just practical governing tools. They were tangible contributions to Frashokrati, acts of ordering a chaotic world. This sense of cosmic purpose may have been a key factor in the incredible resilience and organizational prowess of these empires. Every subject was encouraged to see their own life and work as part of this grand cosmic project. The farmer growing wheat, the judge delivering a fair verdict, the merchant trading honestly, all were actively participating in the renovation of the world, pushing back the forces of decay and collapse one good deed at a time. The influence of this revolutionary idea rippled far beyond the borders of Persia. Many scholars see the core concepts of Zoroastrian eschatology as a fundamental influence on later Jewish, Christian, and Islamic visions of the end times. The very notion of a linear history progressing toward a final, conclusive battle between good and evil, a final judgment for all souls, a resurrection of the dead, and the establishment of a perfected eternal kingdom, these ideas, which are central to the Abrahamic faiths, were largely absent from earlier mythologies and find some of their earliest and clearest expressions in Zoroastrianism. It is a profound legacy, a Persian myth that helped shape the apocalyptic imagination of half the world. The ultimate warning and promise of Frashokrati is that the fate of creation is quite literally in our hands. Collapse in the form of the ultimate victory of chaos is a possibility, but it is not an inevitability. A perfected world is also a possibility, but it will not be delivered to us. We must build it, fight for it, and earn it through a constant, conscious commitment to ethical living. It is the most empowering and demanding prophecy of all, placing the responsibility for our collective future squarely on the shoulders of every individual, transforming daily life into a sacred struggle for a world that is always being made and always being saved. If the Zoroastrian vision of Phrasokriti presents humanity as active warriors building a better world through daily ethical choices, then the Greek myth of Icarus offers a devastatingly personal portrait of what happens when those choices are guided by reckless ambition instead of wisdom. This story, though brief, is one of the most enduring and poignant warnings ever crafted about the peril of ignoring natural limits. It begins not with a god or a king, but with a brilliant, imprisoned inventor. Daedalus, a master craftsman and architect, and his young son Icarus are trapped high in the labyrinth of Crete, a maze Daedalus himself designed for King Minos to contain the monstrous Minotaur. Having fallen out of favor, they are prisoners in their own creation, with the sea serving as an impassable wall and the king's ships guarding every route to freedom. Daedalus, whose intellect has solved so many problems, turns his genius to the ultimate escape. Gazing at the birds soaring freely overhead, he has a radical inspiration. If they cannot escape by land or sea, they will conquer the sky itself. He collects feathers from the gulls that circle their tower, carefully sorting them by size. He fashions a framework of wood and then begins the meticulous work of building 2 pairs of magnificent wings, using beeswax to bind the feathers together, starting with the smallest and layering up to the largest to mimic the natural aerofoil of a bird's wing. It is a breathtaking act of innovation, a fusion of keen observation and masterful engineering. As he fits the wings to his son's shoulders, he delivers a crucial warning, a set of operating instructions for this revolutionary technology. He tells Icarus that he must follow a middle course. Flying too low would cause the damp sea spray to clog the feathers, weighing him down and dragging him into the waves. But flying too high, he cautions, would be even more catastrophic. The heat of the sun would melt the wax that held their invention together. The path to safety was a narrow, precarious corridor between 2 equally deadly extremes. The initial flight is pure, exhilarating success. They leap from their prison tower and feel the incredible lift of the wings beneath their arms. They are flying, soaring over the astonished guards and the ships below, leaving the island of Crete behind them. This is the moment of triumph, the payoff of Daedalus's genius. But it is in this moment of ultimate freedom that the tragedy unfolds. Icarus, intoxicated by the thrill of flight and the dizzying sense of power, forgets his father's warning. He is no longer a fugitive, he feels like a god. He begins to climb higher, chasing the ecstasy of the ascent, pushing towards the vast, brilliant sun. He ignores the gentle warming of the wax, the faint smell of honey beginning to soften in the heat. He is consumed by hubris, that very Greek concept of overweening pride that invites destruction. The higher he climbs, the more the sun's heat intensifies until finally the bonds fail. The wax liquefies, the feathers loosen, and one by one they detach from the frame. The magnificent wings disintegrate around him, and Icarus plummets from the zenith of his ambition into the cold sea below, which now bears his name, the Icarian Sea. Daedalus, helpless, watches his son fall, a victim of his own invention's success. On the surface, this is a simple moral fable about the importance of listening to one's parents. But its deeper resonance as a civilizational warning is profound. Daedalus represents the brilliant, innovative drive of humanity, our capacity to solve seemingly impossible problems through intellect and creativity. His wings are a symbol of any transformative technology, from the first plow to the atomic bomb to artificial intelligence. They are not inherently evil. In fact, they are the very tools of our liberation. Icarus, however, represents the human spirit that wields that technology, a spirit often intoxicated by its own power, prone to arrogance, and dismissive of cautions. The melting wax is the unforeseen flaw, the critical vulnerability, the unintended consequence that every new innovation carries within it. The myth doesn't condemn the wings, it condemns the reckless pilot who, in his euphoria, forgot they had limits. This story echoes through history with a chilling clarity. We can see Icarus in the captain of the Titanic, so confident in his unsinkable ship that he raced through an iceberg field. We see him in the engineers at Chernobyl, whose confidence in their control over the atom led them to disable crucial safety systems with catastrophic results. We see him in the speculative financiers whose complex, ingenious financial instruments, their own waxen wings, melted in the heat of the 2008 economic crisis, causing a global fall. For any civilization, the myth is a permanent caution. Progress is not a straight, upward line to the sun. It is a narrow, middle path that requires constant navigation and profound humility. Every technological leap, every imperial expansion, every new source of energy brings with it a new set of vulnerabilities and ethical dilemmas. To ignore them, to be seduced by the sheer thrill of the new without heeding the wisdom of experience, is to risk a fall that can undo all the progress that was made. The fall of Icarus is not just the death of a boy, it is the collapse of a brilliant idea because it was mismanaged. It is the sinking of a city built below sea level because we believed our levees were invincible. It is the toxic aftermath of a miracle chemical we released into the environment without understanding its long-term effects. The myth urges a balance between ambition and restraint, innovation and wisdom, the daring to fly and the prudence to remember what holds the feathers together. It is a timeless allegory for the delicate dance of human advancement, a dance where one misstep can be fatal. This specific warning about the fragility of human collaboration and the dangers of overambition finds its ultimate expression in another towering myth of failure, one that explains the very fragmentation of human language itself. If the fall of Icarus is a personal tragedy born from a single individual's hubris, the myth of the Tower of Babel scales this warning up to a societal cataclysm, a story that explains the very fragmentation of the human world itself. Found in the book of Genesis, this brief but potent narrative is a cornerstone of biblical tradition, yet its roots likely extend deep into the soil of ancient Mesopotamia, reflecting the very real anxieties of the world's first cosmopolitan empires. The story begins in the aftermath of the Great Flood with a humanity that is still unified, a single people speaking a single language. Migrating from the east, they settle on a plain in the land of Shinar, a direct reference to Sumer, the cradle of Mesopotamian civilization. It is here that they conceive of a project of breathtaking audacity. They decide to build a city, and at its heart, a tower so immense that its top will reach into the heavens. This is not merely a tall building, it is a direct challenge to the divine order, an attempt to storm the gates of the celestial realm and, as they say, make a name for ourselves lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Their chosen building material is deeply symbolic. Lacking stone in the alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, they use brick, meticulously fired in kilns to achieve great strength, and bitumen for mortar. This represents a pivotal moment in human history, the move from nature's raw materials to human-made technology. The tower is a monument to their collective ingenuity, their organizational skill, and their technological prowess. They are no longer simply surviving, they are conquering their environment through coordinated effort. For a moment, it seems that unified humanity is truly unstoppable. Then God descends to see the city and the tower. The phrasing is almost humorous in its understatement. The creator of the universe must come down for a closer look at this surprisingly ambitious construction project. His response is not one of anger, but of profound concern. He observes that because the people are one and share a single language, nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. This is the crucial, often misunderstood pivot of the entire story. God's action is not a petty punishment for their ambition, it is a preventative measure. The problem is not the tower itself, but the unchecked, unified power that building it represents. A humanity with no limits, no friction, and no diversity of thought could, in its hubris, attempt anything, potentially unleashing chaos upon itself and the creation. The divine solution is as elegant as it is devastating. God does not smash the tower with a lightning bolt. He does not send a flood. Instead, he attacks the very foundation of their collaboration, their communication. He confuses their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. In an instant, the construction site descends into chaos. The precise instructions of the architects become gibberish to the masons. The requests of the foremen are met with bewildered stares from the laborers. The single, unified project shatters into a cacophony of misunderstanding and frustration. The collaborative effort collapses completely. The project is abandoned and the people are scattered across the face of the earth, finally fulfilling the very fear their project was meant to prevent. The city is named Babel, a play on the Hebrew word Balul, meaning to confuse, but also a direct nod to the real Mesopotamian city of Babylon, whose own name, Bab-Ilim, meant a gate of the god. The unfinished tower becomes a monument to failed ambition, a gate that leads not to heaven but to division. This myth is a profound critique of imperial overreach, likely born from the experience of subjugated peoples living under the thumb of mighty empires like Babylon and Assyria. These empires were famous for their grand building projects, their own towers to heaven, in the form of massive ziggurats which were constructed using conscripted labor from dozens of different conquered nations, all speaking different languages. The myth can be read as a subtle act of resistance, a warning from a minority culture about the dangers of a homogenizing, centralized power that seeks to impose a single culture, a single language, and a single worldview on everyone. The confusion of tongues, therefore, is not just a punishment, it is also a form of divine protection for cultural diversity. It ensures that no single group can ever again amass such totalizing power. It forces humanity to learn cooperation through the hard work of translation, empathy, and compromise, rather than through imperial decree. The story warns that a society built solely on a quest for glory and a drive to erase all differences is fundamentally fragile. Its cohesion is superficial, and when the language of command fails, the entire project disintegrates, leaving behind only a ruined tower and a legacy of separation. It is a timeless lesson in the limits of human collaboration and the essential, if sometimes difficult, value of our differences. From the fragmented plains of Babel, where human ambition was checked by divine intervention, we journey now to the lush, vibrant heart of West Africa, where the Yoruba people tell a creation story that beautifully intertwines the very act of foundation with a solemn warning about its fragility. The myth of Ojujuwa and the founding of the sacred city of Isle Ife is not merely an account of beginnings. It is a profound philosophical statement that order is not a permanent state, but a delicate achievement that must be actively and continuously maintained against the ever-present threat of chaos. In the beginning, according to the Yoruba cosmogony, the world was a marshy, watery wilderness, a primordial realm of formless potential. The supreme deity Olodumare tasked Obatala, the god of clarity and purity, with the sacred duty of creating solid land and the first humans. Obatala descended from the heavens on a long gold chain, carrying a snail shell filled with sacred earth, a 5-toed chicken, and a palm nut. However, upon arriving at the threshold of the watery expanse, he grew weary and, distracted by the palm wine he had brought with him, fell into a deep, intoxicated sleep. Seeing that the crucial work of creation had stalled, Olajumer dispatched another divine emissary, Ojujuwa. Finding Obatala asleep, Ojujuwa took the materials and proceeded with the mission. He poured the sacred earth onto the waters and placed the five-toed chicken upon it. The chicken began to scratch and scatter the earth, spreading it across the primordial waters until it formed a wide, solid expanse of land, which became known as If, the place of wide expansion. This land, Isle If, became the very navel of the world, the sacred point from which all Yoruba civilization would emanate. Ojujuwa then became the first ruler of this new world, the first Uni of If, and the progenitor of the Yoruba people. This narrative, however, contains the seeds of its own cautionary tale. The very act of creation is born from a moment of disruption, a divine usurpation. Obatala's failure due to intoxication and Ojujuwa's subsequent success established a foundational tension, a rift between two powerful spiritual forces that would echo through Yoruba history. This is not a simple story of right and wrong. Both deities are revered. It instead illustrates that the genesis of order is often messy, competitive, and fraught with the potential for conflict, setting a precedent that the stability of the world is not a given, but a precarious balance that must be constantly negotiated. This myth was the ideological bedrock for the great Yoruba kingdom states such as Oyo and Benin, whose rulers claimed direct descent from Ojujuwa and therefore held the sacred authority to rule. The city of If remained the spiritual home, the place where the world began, and all political power derived its legitimacy from this connection. But the myth also encoded a powerful warning for these rulers. Just as Ojujuwa had to complete the work that Obatala failed to finish, a king's primary duty was to maintain the balance between the spiritual realm I and the physical world Aurum. This balance was sustained through strict adherence to ritual, the dispensation of impartial justice, and the careful observation of taboos. Neglecting these duties was not merely a political misstep, it was a cosmic crime that could invite Ash, the divine energy that flows through all things, to become unbalanced, manifesting as drought, famine, internal rebellion, or invasion. The historical decline of the Oyo Empire in the early 19th century serves as a powerful real-world echo of this mythological warning. At its height, Oyo was a formidable power, but it eventually succumbed to a perfect storm of internal strife, including a struggle for the throne and the revolt of subordinate chiefs, coupled with external pressure from the rising Fulani Empire. The myth interprets such a collapse not as a random historical event, but as the inevitable consequence of a breakdown in this sacred covenant between the ruler, the people, and the gods. The foundation laid by Ojujuwa was always conditional, predicated on the virtue and vigilance of his descendants. Therefore, the Yoruba myth of origin is a deeply sophisticated model of civilizational dynamics. It teaches that creation and collapse are two sides of the same coin, eternally linked. The very act of building something, a city, a kingdom, a society, automatically creates the conditions for its potential undoing. The forces of chaos represented by the formless waters are never truly defeated. They are only temporarily held at bay by the continuous, conscious effort to uphold order, justice, and spiritual harmony. This offers a timeless lesson. The health of a civilization cannot be measured solely by its wealth or military power, but by the integrity of its rituals, the fairness of its laws, and the reverence its leaders show for the foundational principles upon which it was built. Vigilance, not monument building, is the true price of preservation. From the intricate spiritual political balance of the Yoruba world, we now turn to a philosophy that makes impermanence itself the foundational truth of all existence. Buddhism, emerging in India around the 6th century BCE, offers perhaps the most direct and unflinching diagnosis of the mechanics of collapse, not as a singular event, but as the constant, humming background frequency of the universe itself. This is the core concept of anicca, or impermanence. The Buddha taught that all conditioned phenomena, every thought, every feeling, every object, every person, and every civilization are in a constant state of flux, arising and passing away due to a complex web of causes and conditions. To believe otherwise, to cling to the illusion of permanence in a world that is inherently transient, is the primary source of all human suffering, or dukkha. For a society, this clinging is the very engine of its downfall. This profound teaching is vividly illustrated in Buddhist art and narrative through the Bhava Chakra, the wheel of life. This intricate diagram is not a single myth but a comprehensive map of reality, depicting the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, driven by ignorance, craving, and aversion. At the very center of the wheel, you find a pig, a rooster, and a snake, endlessly chasing each other's tails. These represent the three poisons: the pig for ignorance or delusion, the bird for greed or attachment, and the snake for hatred or aversion. This swirling core is the epicenter of all suffering, and from it radiate the various realms of existence, from the heavenly abodes of the gods to the tormented depths of the hells. The entire wheel is clutched in the claws of a fearsome figure, Yama, the Lord of Death, signifying that no realm within the cycle of conditioned existence is free from eventual dissolution. The wheel's message is stark: any system, any state of being, any civilization built upon the unstable foundations of greed, hatred, and delusion is, by its very nature, doomed to collapse. Its stability is a temporary illusion, a precarious configuration that will inevitably unravel when its supporting conditions change. This philosophical framework is brought down to earth in the Jataka tales, the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. These are not abstract sermons, they are rich narrative warnings directed squarely at those in power. Many of these tales are essentially manuals on governance and the ethical pitfalls that lead kingdoms to ruin. In one famous story, the Buddha was born as a wise hare who willingly sacrifices himself to feed a hungry beggar, who is actually the god Saka in disguise, teaching that true leadership is founded on selfless compassion rather than self-aggrandizement. Another tale tells of a past life as a noble elephant king who gives away his own tusks to save his herd from a greedy human king, a stark lesson on the corrosive nature of unchecked desire and the nobility of sacrifice for the community. Perhaps most pointedly, stories like that of King Mahasudarsana detail the gradual decline of a magnificent and powerful ruler who, despite his vast wealth and perfect city, eventually succumbs to attachment and pride, leading to the slow fading of his splendor and the dispersal of his kingdom. The moral is never that the king was evil, but that he was human. He clung, he desired, he believed his power was permanent, and in doing so, he planted the seeds of his own demise. This Buddhist world, you provided a powerful psychological and ethical toolkit for societies across Asia, from the monsoonal kingdoms of Southeast Asia to the imperial courts of China and Japan. It taught that collapse is not a divine punishment meted out by a capricious god, but a natural law as inevitable as the fading of a flower. A society that over-exploits its environment out of greed, that wages war on its neighbors out of hatred, or that ignores the suffering of its people out of delusion is not sinning. It is simply acting in a way that guarantees its own instability. It is building its house on a foundation of sand, and the rising tide of change will surely wash it away. The solution, therefore, is not to build higher walls or amass greater wealth in a futile attempt to create something permanent. The solution is to cultivate resilience through non-attachment, ethical living, and mindful awareness. A wise ruler, and by extension a wise society, understands the truth of anicca. They enjoy periods of peace and prosperity without clinging to them, and they navigate periods of famine and war without succumbing to despair, understanding that both are temporary states. This philosophy fosters a profound adaptability, a flexibility that allows cultures to absorb shocks, integrate new ideas, and evolve rather than shatter when faced with inevitable change. It is the ultimate reminder that to resist change is to suffer, but to accept it is to find a path to enduring peace. Leaving behind the philosophical acceptance of impermanence in Buddhist thought, we journey now into the deep, ancient forests of Eastern Europe, where the Slavic peoples wove their understanding of the world's fragility into a powerful, living symbol, the world tree. This was not a distant, abstract concept, but the very axis of their cosmos, a great oak or sometimes a mighty ash tree known as the Viselanoid Drivo or Dub. Its massive roots plunged deep into the underworld, a realm of ancestors and spirits known as Nav. Its immense trunk stood firmly in our world, Yav, the realm of the living and the tangible. And its soaring, expansive branches reached high into the heavens, Prav, the realm of the gods and cosmic order. This tree was the ultimate connector, the conduit of life force and balance, binding all layers of existence into a single, breathing, interdependent whole. The health of this tree was synonymous with the health of the world itself. Its steady, strong presence meant stability, good harvests, and harmony between the people and the gods. But folklore held that in times of great coming turmoil, the approach of war, the threat of a terrible famine, or a period of profound spiritual decay, the world tree would begin to shudder and shake. Its leaves might wither and fall out of season, or a sickness might spread through its bark, signaling that the connection between the realms was fraying, that the cosmic order was under threat. This was the ultimate early warning system, a mythological barometer for civilizational stress. The shaking of the tree was often a prelude to the central drama of Slavic mythology, the eternal, cyclical struggle between Perun and Veles. This was far more than a simple battle between a hero and a monster. It was a cosmic allegory for the fundamental forces that governed their agricultural lives. Perun, the god of thunder, lightning, and the clear sky, was the quintessential force of order, structure, and celestial power. He was the patron of warriors and princes, the enforcer of oaths, and the bringer of the life-giving rain that nourished the crops. His opposite was Veles, a shape-shifting god of the earth, waters, commerce, and the underworld. Veles was not evil in a simplistic sense. He was the embodiment of chaos, potential, and untamed nature. He was the god of cattle, representing wealth that was mobile and unpredictable, and he ruled over the mysterious, fertile depths from which all life springs and to which it returns. The myth tells how Veles, in the form of a great serpent or a monstrous dragon, would slither up from his watery underworld and attempt to steal Perun's divine cattle or kidnap his children, threatening the established order of the heavens. In response, the furious Perun would chase him across the sky, his chariot wheels rumbling as thunder, hurling his lightning axe down at the serpent, which would flee, hiding behind trees or human beings. The battle was colossal and destructive, but it always ended the same way. Perun would eventually strike Veles down, banishing him back to the underworld. Yet the story never concludes with Veles's permanent defeat. He always recovers, and the struggle begins anew the following year. This eternal conflict was a direct mirror to the realities of Slavic life. The victory of Perun represented the triumph of the spring and summer skies, the arrival of the rains that ensured a bountiful harvest, the defense of the community against external threats. The escape and persistence of veils represented the inevitable arrival of autumn and winter, the dying of the crops, the descent into the cold, chaotic time of year where the earth seemed dead and the underworld felt closer. But it also represented the necessary, fertile chaos that precedes new growth. The battle was not about good defeating evil forever. It was about maintaining a dynamic, tense balance. This mythology provided a framework for understanding their own history, which was marked by successive waves of invasion and periods of famine. A raid by a rival tribe or a Viking war party was not just a human conflict, it was an earthly manifestation of Veal's chaotic influence. A devastating drought was a sign that Perun was not prevailing, that the forces of disorder were gaining the upper hand. These stories taught that collapse, in the form of invasion or famine, was a recurring part of a natural cycle, not a permanent end. Just as Perun always ultimately defeated the serpent, order would eventually be restored, but only after a period of necessary struggle and upheaval. This worldview, born from an intimate connection to the agricultural cycle, offered a profound and resilient hope. The Slavic vision of collapse was always followed by regeneration. The shaking of the world tree, while a warning, was also a sign of impending renewal, a cosmic shudder before a rebirth. This is why their myths, though often overshadowed by Greek or Norse traditions, are so deeply insightful. They did not fear the end of the world because they saw ends and beginnings as part of an endless breathing process. A forest fire clears the way for new growth. A harsh winter kills pests and returns nutrients to the soil for a richer spring. By extension, the fall of a chieftain, the burning of a village, or the hardship of a famine was a painful but necessary phase in a larger, cyclical pattern. Their warning was not about avoiding collapse entirely, but about understanding its role. To disrespect the land, to break oaths, to live out of balance was to invite a more violent, more chaotic manifestation of Veal's power, to make the world tree shake itself to pieces. But if one lived with respect for the natural order, honored the gods of both the sky and the earth, and understood that hardship was a season, not a finale, then renewal was always waiting on the other side. This powerful idea that within every ending sleeps a beginning finds a startlingly similar echo in a myth from across the globe, where the fate of the world was believed to hang in the balance not annually, but across vast apocalyptic ages. This profound Slavic acceptance of cyclical destruction and rebirth finds a terrifyingly literal and immediate expression in the cosmology of the Aztecs, a civilization for whom the threat of collapse was not a distant philosophical concept, but a daily, visceral reality that demanded constant, desperate action. At the heart of the Aztec world was a story of absolute fragility, a creation myth that was also a prophecy of certain doom. The legend of the Five Suns, meticulously detailed in texts like the Codex Chimalpopoca, describes a universe that had already been created and annihilated 4 separate times. Each of these previous worlds, or suns, had its own race of humanity and was presided over by a different deity, and each was utterly destroyed by a specific cataclysm linked to the elemental forces of nature. The first sun, Nahui Oslotl, was the age of the jaguar, a world whose inhabitants were devoured by monstrous jaguars that blotted out the sun, plunging the earth into a perpetual night of teeth and claws. The second sun, Nahui Ehekatl, the age of wind, was swept away by colossal hurricanes that tore the people from the earth and transformed them into monkeys. The third sun, Nahui Quiahuatl, the age of rain, was consumed by a rain of fire, a global volcanic eruption that melted the very stones. The fourth sun, Nahui Atl, the age of water, was drowned in a great flood that lasted 52 years, with the survivors transformed into fish. We now live in the fifth sun, Nahui Olan, the age of movement. This current era was born from a moment of supreme, selfless sacrifice at the mythical city of Teotihuacan. According to the myth, the gods gathered in darkness to determine who would have the honor of sacrificing themselves to become the new sun. Two noble gods stepped forward, the rich and proud Tecusistecatl and the humble, diseased Nanahuatzin, who was covered in boils and offered only his own blood and the scabs from his skin as his sacrifice. A great pyre was built, and when the moment came, Tecusistecatl hesitated, frozen by fear at the immense heat. But Nanahuatzin, without a moment's doubt, leapt courageously into the flames, becoming the brilliant sun. Shamed by this act of courage, Tecusistecatl then jumped in after him, becoming a second, equally bright sun. The other gods, realizing that two suns could not exist, threw a rabbit in the face of Tecusistecatl, dimming his light and transforming him into the moon. But a problem remained. The new sun, Nanahuatzin, was born, but it hung motionless in the sky. It could not move on its own. The gods understood that the ultimate sacrifice had been made, but it was not enough. For the sun to begin its vital journey across the sky, for this fifth world to even begin, they too would have to give everything. And so, in an act of collective devotion, the gods offered their own lifeblood, their own hearts, to empower the sun and set it in motion. This foundational act established the most critical and chilling law of the Aztec universe. The sun required constant nourishment in the form of the most precious substance in existence, human life, the Chalchihuatl, or precious water, the sacred energy found in human blood. Without this ongoing sacrifice, the sun would simply stop, the fifth age would cease, and the world would be plunged into a final, permanent darkness, shattered by catastrophic earthquakes. This was not a metaphor. For the Aztecs, this was a scientific and theological fact. They lived in a world they knew was destined to end, and their entire civilization was organized around a single, terrifying mission: to stave off that inevitable collapse for one more day, one more cycle, through a massive, continuous human effort. The famous practice of human sacrifice, so shocking to the Spanish conquistadors, was not an act of random cruelty or mere political terror. It was the essential fuel for cosmic maintenance. Every heart offered to the sun god Huitzilopochtli was a direct transfusion of energy, a literal recharge of the solar battery. The blood spilled on the temples was a repayment of the sacred debt owed to the gods for their own primordial sacrifice. This worldview rationalized and demanded their militaristic expansion. Warfare was not primarily fought for land or wealth, but for a specific resource: captives who were known as the beloved of the god, and whose sacrifice was the highest form of offering. The infamous Flowery Wars were arranged battles with neighboring states like Tlaxcala, not for conquest, but to mutually secure a steady supply of sacrificial victims to keep the cosmos running. This myth was the ultimate motivator for societal effort, creating a culture of disciplined, zealous warriors and a populace that accepted, and even participated in, this economy of blood, because the alternative was the total and absolute annihilation of everything. The myth was also a brilliant reflection of the very real environmental and political pressures the Aztecs faced. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in a lake in a high valley surrounded by active volcanoes. They were acutely aware of seismic activity, droughts, and the precariousness of their agricultural system. The previous destructions by jaguars, wind, fire, and water were likely mythological interpretations of very real natural disasters that had plagued Mesoamerica for millennia. The political landscape was equally volatile, a shifting mosaic of rival city-states in constant competition. The Five Suns myth provided a framework for understanding this terrifying instability. It wasn't random. It was the default state of a universe that required constant Herculean effort to maintain. The Aztec response was to build one of the most powerful, organized, and driven empires the Americas had ever seen, all in service of delaying an apocalypse they believed was not only possible but guaranteed. Theirs was a civilization living on borrowed time, and their mythology was the clock by which they measured it, a story that both explained their existential anxiety and dictated the extreme measures they felt were necessary to survive. This intensely specific and dire prophecy, however, connects to a theme so universal it echoes across every continent and culture we have explored, a final, unifying thread in the tapestry of human fear. While the Aztecs believed their world required a constant offering of blood to stave off a prophesied earthquake, and the Norse awaited a fiery battle they knew was their fate, there exists a warning so primal, so deeply embedded in the human story, that it transcends any single culture or continent. This is our 20th and final myth, a story told not once, but in hundreds of variations across the globe, from the highest mountains to the most remote islands. It is the universal flood myth, a narrative of total annihilation that appears in the legends of ancient Sumerians, the indigenous peoples of Australia, the tribes of Africa, and the First Nations of North America. This is not a case of one civilization borrowing from another. It is a chorus of voices from disconnected corners of the world, all singing the same terrifying song of a world cleansed by water. The specifics change: the name of the hero, the type of boat, the kind of bird sent to find land, but the core message remains hauntingly consistent. Humanity overstepped, and the gods responded with an overwhelming reset. Consider the breadth of this shared nightmare. In the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia, the Great Flood is often brought on by the anger of ancestral spirits or rainbow serpents due to the breaking of sacred laws or the disrespect shown to the natural world. The Inca of South America tell of the god Viracocha unleashing a deluge to destroy a race of stone giants who had become arrogant and cruel, sparing only two beings to repopulate a more humble world. The ancient Greeks had Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survived a flood sent by Zeus to punish human impiety. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest tell of a time when the rain fell for an eternity, submerging the entire world until only the tops of the tallest mountains remained, and the survivors had to learn to live in a new, watery world. From the plains of Africa to the forests of North America, the story repeats. This is not a coincidence. It points to a shared, deep-seated human intuition, a collective psychological scar or memory that societal collapse is intrinsically linked to a profound moral and ethical failure. The flood is never just a natural disaster in these myths. It is a divine punishment, a direct consequence of broken covenants with the gods, with each other, and with the natural world itself. What could possibly explain this astonishing commonality? One compelling theory points to our shared history. Geologists have found evidence of several catastrophic flooding events at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, when melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, swallowing vast coastal plains that were once home to human populations. The memory of these traumatic events, passed down through thousands of generations in oral traditions, could have crystallized into the flood myths we know today. The story of a lost land beneath the waves, of a world forever changed by water, may be a distant, mythologized echo of a very real historical catastrophe that affected our ancestors on a global scale. Another theory is more psychological. Water, in dreams and symbolism, often represents the unconscious, the emotional, and the chaotic. A great flood, then, could be a powerful metaphor for the overwhelming power of our own unchecked passions, our capacity for chaos and destruction when we abandon reason, ethics, and community. The flood is the ultimate symbol of the chaos that awaits when the structures of civilization, both physical and moral, are washed away. But these stories are far more than just records of fear or ancient disasters. They are, at their heart, stories of resilience and renewal. In every single version, someone survives. A couple, a family, a single righteous man is chosen to endure, to carry the embers of the old world into the new. This is the most crucial part of the warning. The flood is not the end of the story. It is the brutal, necessary prelude to a new beginning. The survival of Noah or Utnapishtim or the countless other heroes signifies that recovery is always possible, but it demands a renewal of values. The world that emerges from the waters is pristine, washed clean of the corruption that doomed its predecessor. The survivors are given a second chance, a new covenant to live rightly, to honor the world they have been given, and to remember the price of arrogance. The universal flood myth is ultimately a story of hope. It acknowledges our incredible vulnerability, a single species on a planet capable of unimaginable power, but it also affirms our incredible resilience. It teaches that collapse, however total it may seem, can be a cleansing, a painful but necessary lesson that allows for a more humble and harmonious world to be built from the ashes, or in this case, from the receding waters. This global chorus of deluge stories serves as humanity's oldest and most widespread moral compass, a collective memory written in water, reminding every culture that our survival depends on the ethical choices we make every day. What becomes truly astonishing as we step back from these 20 individual stories is not their differences, but their profound and echoing similarities. From the sunken spires of Atlantis to the shaking boughs of the Slavic world tree, from the blood-soaked sands of Egypt to the prophesied purification of the Hopi, these myths speak a universal language of warning. They are not isolated curiosities but a global chorus, and when we listen closely, we can discern four powerful, recurring melodies in their song. The first and perhaps loudest of these is the peril of hubris. Time and again, we see civilizations or their representative figures reach for what is beyond their rightful grasp. The Atlanteans, with their advanced technology and military might, believed they could conquer the known world. Icarus, empowered by his father's brilliant invention, believed he could fly to the sun. The Babylonians, unified by a single language, believed they could build a tower to heaven and make a name for themselves that would defy the very cosmos. This pattern of overreach, of believing one's power or intellect makes one exempt from natural or divine law, is the most common trigger for collapse in these narratives. It is the original sin of civilization, the moment a society stops seeing itself as part of a delicate balance and begins to see itself as the master of all it surveys. The second thread, inextricably woven with the first, is a disregard for the natural environment. These myths demonstrate a sophisticated ancient understanding that human societies are not separate from their ecosystems but deeply embedded within them. The Norse knew that a Fimbulwinter, 3 years of endless cold, would shatter their world. The Maya encoded warnings about drought and resource depletion into their cyclical calendar. The Epic of Gilgamesh frames the gods' decision to send the flood as a direct response to the overwhelming noise and overpopulation of humanity, a symptom of urban stress. In these stories, the environment is not a passive backdrop, it is an active participant. When harmony is broken through exploitation, pollution, or simple disrespect, the natural world reacts with a devastating fury, becoming the primary instrument of divine retribution. The earth itself rises up in the form of earthquakes, floods, or famines, to wipe the slate clean. This reveals a pre-industrial ecological wisdom that we, in our modern age of climate change, are only now rediscovering the hard way. The third unifying theme is the idea that external collapse is always preceded by an internal, moral decay. The physical destruction of a city or the fall of an empire is never the first event. It is the final, visible consequence of a sickness that has long been festering in the heart of the culture. The Hindu concept of the Kali Yuga is the ultimate expression of this, detailing a precise and chilling checklist of societal failures. Rulers become thieves, families break apart, greed replaces virtue, and truth becomes scarce. The Roman myth of Lucretia shows how a single act of tyrannical corruption by a ruler's son can unravel the entire social contract and trigger a revolution. The Yoruba understood that a king's neglect of ritual and justice didn't just cause political trouble, it literally unbalanced the cosmic energy of the universe, inviting chaos into the world. These myths argue that a society's strength is not measured by the height of its walls or the size of its treasury, but by the integrity of its people and the justice of its laws. When that moral fabric rots, the civilization becomes a hollow shell, vulnerable to the slightest pressure. Yet, for all their terrifying visions of doom, these stories are not ultimately tales of despair. They contain a fourth, crucial thread, the possibility of renewal through humility and conscious effort. This is not a passive hope, but an active call to action. The Norse Ragnarök ends not with endless darkness, but with a new, green world rising from the sea, and a new generation of gods and humans ready to begin again. The Zoroastrian Frashokrati is the most demanding version of this, placing the responsibility for the world's renovation squarely on human shoulders, requiring us to fight for a better future with every good thought, word, and deed. Even the tragic failure of Moi serves as a lesson that guides his people toward a more humble and respectful way of living within natural limits. This recurring motif of rebirth tells us that our ancestors did not see collapse as a full stop, but as a semicolon. It is a painful, often terrifying transition, but one that contains the seed of a new beginning for those who learn the lessons of the past. So what does this ancient, global wisdom mean for us today? These 20 myths are far more than just entertaining stories. They are a sophisticated form of crisis management and a powerful tool for self-reflection. Our ancestors used the language of gods and monsters to encode very real, hard-won historical lessons about the vulnerabilities of complex societies. They are a kind of cultural immune system, a way of remembering the diseases that felled previous civilizations so that future generations might recognize the early symptoms. The warning signs they describe are not locked in the past. We can see them all around us in the modern world. The hubris of believing our technology makes us invincible to a pandemic or climate change. The environmental disregard evident in polluted oceans and clear-cut forests, the moral decay of vast inequality, political polarization, and the erosion of community trust. These are not new problems, they are the oldest problems in human history, and our mythology has been trying to get our attention about them for thousands of years. These stories offer us a blueprint, not for avoiding all change or hardship, but for building resilience. They teach us that collapse is not a random asteroid strike or an inevitable fate. It is, more often than not, a choice, the cumulative result of 1,000 smaller choices to prioritize power over wisdom, wealth over balance, and the self over the whole. But the opposite is also true. The myths show us that resilience is also a choice. It is the choice to live with humility, to respect our environment, to uphold justice, and to continually put in the effort to maintain the fragile, precious balance we call civilization. From the sunken halls of Atlantis to the frozen battlefields of Ragnarök, from the prophetic calendars of the Maya to the shaking boughs of the Slavic world tree, these 20 myths form a chorus of voices shouting across the centuries. They were not merely entertaining stories told around ancient fires. They were the sophisticated crisis management systems of their time, intricate narrative machines designed to package hard-won historical lessons into memorable, repeatable forms. Our ancestors witnessed the slow unraveling of empires and the sudden collapse of environmental systems, and they embedded those observations into the very fabric of their cultural identity. These stories are a kind of cultural DNA, carrying within them the survival instincts of entire civilizations. They reveal a profound and universal awareness that no society, no matter how grand its pyramids or powerful its armies, is immune to the slow creep of decay or the swift strike of consequence. What these stories teach us above all else is that collapse is rarely a single catastrophic event. It is a process, a cascade of accumulated choices made over generations. It is the death by 1,000 cuts. The Atlanteans did not sink in a day. They corroded from within over centuries, their moral compass slowly spinning until they lost all direction. The Norse gods were not surprised by Ragnarök. Their own past actions, their broken oaths and tolerated treacheries, set the entire chain of events in motion. The fall of the Roman monarchy began not on a battlefield, but in a quiet bedroom with a single, unforgivable act of tyranny. These myths show us that the seeds of a society's destruction are often sown during its greatest triumphs, hidden within the very innovations and ambitions that propelled it to glory. The tower reaches its greatest height the moment before it becomes unstable. This is the painful, essential wisdom they offer: to be vigilant during times of plenty, to question the cost of our progress, and to never mistake technological advancement for moral or spiritual evolution. This ancient wisdom is not a relic, it is a mirror held up to our modern world, and the reflection is startlingly clear. We face our own versions of these age-old challenges. Our pursuit of technological mastery echoes Icarus's flight, as we develop artificial intelligence and genetic engineering with awe-inspiring power, yet often without the parallel ethical frameworks to guide their use. Our environmental crises are the modern manifestations of the Hopi prophecies and the flood myths, as we see rivers metaphorically boil with pollution and experience the Fimbulwinter like disruptions of climate change. Our political and social fragmentation, the erosion of shared truth and community, resonates with the confusion of Babel and the moral decay of the Kali Yuga. We are living inside the warning. The great work of our time, then, is not to invent new solutions from scratch, but to listen to these ancient voices. It is to learn to balance our incredible capacity for innovation with the timeless wisdom of humility, to pair our ambition with a profound respect for the natural and social systems that sustain us. Mythology, therefore, is far more than a collection of stories about the past. It is a perpetual conversation with the future. It is a guidebook written in the language of metaphor and symbol, offering a map through the perennial challenges of the human condition. These 20 myths provide us with a diagnostic toolkit, a way to check the vital signs of our own civilization. Are we exhibiting the hubris of Atlantis? The communication breakdown of Babel, the spiritual disconnection of the Kali Yuga. By recognizing these patterns, we gain the agency to change our course. The goal is not to avoid change or to retreat from progress, but to navigate it with intention, to build societies that are not just powerful and wealthy, but also wise, resilient, and deeply connected to the ethical and ecological foundations that make life possible. If this journey through the myths of collapse has resonated with you, if you see these ancient patterns playing out in our world today, you are already part of this crucial conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What myth felt most relevant to you, and what lessons do you think we most need to remember? For more deep dives into the wisdom hidden within ancient stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you for spending this time exploring the echoes of the past to better understand our present and shape our future. May we all have the courage to learn from the myths that predicted the end and the wisdom to write a different ending for ourselves.